Solo leveling is the isekai I never knew I needed. I will be frank with all of you, I am burnt out on isekai and I have been for a long time. This feeling of being completely oversaturated by the genre led me to putting off solo leveling for a lot longer than I care to admit. I've seen it on shelves for an extended period of time and would immediately pass over it, writing it off as more filler isekai garbage in a manga landscape that so desperately did not need any more of those types of stories. Then a few months ago, I saw it on sale sitting on a shelf for about $8. Kami himself must have got in my hand to make the purchase, as I truly have no conscious inkling otherwise as to what made me give it a shot, but boy oh boy am I glad I did. See, solo leveling threw me for a loop when it first began. The story introduces us to our protagonist Jin-Woo Sung, who is characterized in the beginning as many isekai protagonists are, a good kid who wants to provide for his mother and younger sister, but is physically unremarkable and as a result is bullied and written off by nearly every character he comes across. For some quick context, in the world of solo leveling, there are beings who are known as hunters, whose job is to use their abilities they achieve from their awakening to close gates that have spontaneously sprouted up around the world which contain monsters of varying levels of danger. An awakening is the process that occurs when an individual who is a normal human being is bestowed with powers through seemingly a random act of chance. Awakened beings are all humans, and there's a hierarchy ranging from E rank to S rank. The power difference within these ranks are quite significant as you climb the tiers, with S rank beings functioning basically as gods who can effectively do whatever they want, when they want, cause who's really gonna stop them? Jin-Woo is an E rank hunter, who even among E ranks has a reputation of being particularly weak. On nearly every dungeon excursion Jin-Woo embarks on, he leaves with significant injuries and barely makes any money due to his contribution being seen as minimal and needless. But as fate would have it, things change, and the tale of Jin-Woo really begins when Jin and a company of other hunters, some of whom he considers his close friends, embark on a gate raid on what is supposed to be a typical low-level dungeon. Things take a drastic turn when the hunters realize they are actually inside of a double dungeon, and they have to make a choice to turn back with the rewards they have already earned, but likely face more severe dangers lying in wait as well. Jin-Woo contemplates deeply for a moment the potential dangers, but after deciding that he is in desperate need of money in order to pay for his mother's hospital care and his sister's schooling, Jin-Woo makes a deciding vote to continue deeper inside. It is this choice to head deeper into the gate that will forever change the course of Jin-Woo's life. After heading further in, the team unknowingly walks directly into the gate boss's chamber, and things go from bad to worse in moments. Despite the gate being identified as E rank, the bosses inside the chamber are anything but, as Jin-Woo's squad quickly realizes that the enemies here are capable of one-shotting all of them, making every mistake a fatal one. Author Chu Gong did a masterful job here, crafting the atmosphere and intensity of this moment within the story. This chapter had me literally holding my breath in anticipation. You could see the absolute fear and desperation that had come across the party, and this part of the narrative is a microcosm for what I feel narratively solo leveling does so much better than so many isekai and isekai-esque stories. It takes the time to analyze the psychology of the characters undergoing these high-stress scenarios and the impact these continued life and death situations would have on an individual's cognitive well-being. As the reader will quickly realize, the events that occurred within this double dungeon will leave Jin-Woo scarred for the remainder of the story. Many of his physical wounds may have healed, but the way he sees the world is fundamentally never the same following this. The conclusion of the double dungeon incident sees Jin-Woo and a handful of other survivors alive, but not without grievous physical and mental injury. In order to survive the gate, some squad members left others to die in order to escape with their own life, leaving everyone involved with deeply rooted guilt, shame, and trust issues. Some were permanently maimed during the mission, leaving them with missing limbs along with their psychological scars. Jin-Woo himself only made it out after being presented with a deal by what is known as the system, seconds before he would have been killed. Jin-Woo and the reader are unsure where this prompt came from and why it chose Jin-Woo specifically to take this bargain, but he does, and after making this deal, Jin-Woo's life-altering injuries he had incurred in the dungeon were healed, but he is now constantly being accosted by pop-up commands like what are seen in modern RPG games, telling him daily tasks he must complete. His health and MP amounts, along with strength, agility, and other D&D style attribute indicators. At first, Jin-Woo thinks he must be hallucinating, but he quickly realizes these daily quest requirements are very real after he fails to complete his dailies and is transported to the penalty zone where he must survive for 4 hours against high-level enemies due to his failure to complete his tasks. Upon realizing the current reality of his circumstances, Jin-Woo reluctantly begins his mandatory training regimen of push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and running. It is also during this time that Jin-Woo learns that due to his participation in the system, he now has the possibility to level up through his combat experience and is able to divide the experience points he receives into various attributes, just like a video game. Through a combination of exercise and willingly throwing himself into solo combat scenarios, Jin-Woo begins to transform. He grows visibly taller, his shoulders are wider, he is significantly more muscular, and is overall much more physically imposing than he ever was before the double dungeon incident. Seeing Jin-Woo's combat experience progression translate to the in-universe differences in his appearance is so satisfying and is yet another subtle but significant thing that helps solo leveling stand out among other isekai series. The story truly carries with it a powerful sense of development, and it goes such a long way with adding a feeling of genuine power escalation to the MC that I'm surprised we don't see this trope invoked more within the genre. But Jinwoo's physical body is not the only thing that has changed. I mentioned before that one of solo leveling's greatest strengths is its dive into the psyche of its characters, and the most interesting example of this comes from the story's main character. Through a combination of years of being looked down upon by the other hunters, coupled with the trauma inflicted on his mind from the double dungeon incident, Jinwoo becomes obsessed with the idea of strength. In moments where he is alone, or in moments of particularly high stress, he is constantly burdened with pervasive thoughts and flashbacks of a double dungeon incident where people whom he thought were his friends left him to die alone in that chamber. He thinks about the snide comments he would receive about his lack of skill in every raid he used to attend, about how powerless the bosses in the double dungeon made him feel. Jinwoo never wants to feel like this again, and as a result, spends the rest of his life after this incident training his body and refusing to go on raids or get closer to others, due to his belief that all the people in his life will eventually turn on you anyway when the situation gets bad enough. Jinwoo is such a captivating character and is deserving of his place as the star of the narrative. As the story progresses, Jinwoo sincerely becomes a badass and steps nicely into the role of the impossibly strong and cool wish fulfillment badass that lots of people want their protagonist to be. But for me, what is far more interesting is the deeply rooted inferiority complex that Jinwoo wrestles with on a daily basis. As the story moves forward, it becomes clear that no matter how much physical power he manages to amass, deep inside of him something remains broken. Jinwoo suffers from imposter syndrome on a deep level, and there's always this little voice in his head telling him that he is not good enough and that no matter how strong he may get, he will always be the pathetic E-Rake hunter, Jinwoo. This insecurity makes Jinwoo so human and adds a layer of complexity to his character that is unfortunately rarely found in the world of isekai protagonists. Woo's morals are tested on nearly every conceivable level, with him even being forced to kill other humans at certain points in the story, and watching him develop for better and worse has been the main draw of solo leveling for me. Honestly, in any other manga, Jinwoo would likely be the villain, but author Chugong has done an excellent job at crafting a world where shades of gray exist. Humans in solo leveling are never all good or all bad, instead existing on some sort of spectrum between these two conceptual ideals. And watching Jinwoo pivot back and forth between these polarities as he works to navigate not only the external world, but his own internal psyche will have you glued to the page from start to finish. This attention to painstakingly crafting the internal state of Jinwoo, along with the breakneck pacing of the events and gorgeous artwork, makes solo leveling a sincere treat to read. I never once had a moment where I was bored reading solo leveling. Chugong and Redai Studio seem to have been very mindful of how each moment of the story would be presented, and made sure that the mind would never linger on any particular moment for too long. If I had to offer criticism of the story, it may be that things in the manga even move too fast at times, and it could be nice to get more context or see certain events more fleshed out before moving to the next chapter. I also want to give a brief shout out to the solid panel layouts in the manhwa. Redai Studio worked hard to make sure that the action throughout the story was readable and coherent, and if it wasn't, it was because it wasn't supposed to be. There were certain panels that conveyed the power of Jinwoo very well, and certain shots that did a lot to establish the grandeur of significant moments or leave the reader shocked at the events of a page turn. All in all, I have very little bad to say about solo leveling. It is very likely my surprise read of the year, and I never in a million years would have thought I'd enjoyed this thing as much as I did. Solo leveling has been a genuinely fun read with more narrative depth than I would have ever given it credit for. The art is jaw-dropping at moments, is tightly paced, and is rightfully deserving of all the praise heaped upon it. If you find yourself in need of a solid read, I absolutely recommend sharpening your dagger, doing some squats, and jumping into that dungeon for some solo leveling. You will not be disappointed.